I come from a family from Rajasthan, and my name is Gunjan Bagla. My grandfather was a cotton trader, and my family has always been in the textile business. So when my parents got married, one of the gifts that my mom received was these towels with her name, S. Bagla. Her name is Sharad, and on the side it was Sharad Bagla written several times. I grew up with these wonderful personalized towels, and we got enough of them to last until I got married, and my wife's name is Smita. So we could use the same towels for Smita. It still said S. Bagla, okay? And so I kind of grew up with that. I've been living in this country for a while. Can we have the next slide? Okay, can everybody see the slides? Okay, you might want to come up closer if you can. So when, there have been two major scandals in India this year. One of them I call Suitgate, which was when all of you might have heard that Prime Minister Narendra Modi was wearing this suit with his name going on the print stripes. It said Narendra Modi, Narendra Modi, Narendra Modi. So my first response was, where can I buy this kind of fabric, for myself? The suit became a big controversy in India, as you might remember. And so the solution was that the Prime Minister decided to auction it off, and they auctioned the suit for $690,000. And so that's what I call the Suitgate controversy. The other controversy you might not have heard about this year, and that I call the Peoplegate controversy. Anybody know what I'm talking about? So President Obama was in Delhi, and like all foreign dignitaries, he was invited to lay a wreath at Rajghat at Mahatma Gandhi's memorial, and then he planted a tree, a peepal tree, right? So a few days later, you know the peepal tree, if you're from India, you know that is a special kind of fig tree. It has a lot of religious significance, and a few days later, the tree lost all of its leaves. So there were reports in the media that the peepal tree is dead, okay? So that I call Peoplegate, okay? That was the second major controversy. And personally, as a business consultant helping American companies do business with India, I am thrilled with these controversies, okay? Isn't it amazing that the only thing we have to worry about is a dying peepal tree and the Prime Minister's suit? We don't have to worry about the IT Minister going to jail for taking thousands of crores. We don't have to worry about the Commonwealth Games leader being accused of bilking the government for thousands of crores. All of those huge controversies we saw over the last 5 years, seem so different from what we have to face today. If this is all the Indian press has to deal with, I think we are looking at a glorious time for India coming forward. I try to look for good news in bad news, and to me, these two stories really stick out. Okay? And I was also trying to wake all of you up, since it's the end of the day. Okay. Let's move on to the next slide. Alrighty. So what's going on in India today? Okay. You might have read the report from The Economist that the growth rate of India is now matching the growth rate of China. Okay. The slide on the right is from The Economist showing the 20-year growth rates, GDP growth rates. The slide on the left, which might be hard for some of you to see in the back, is from Fortune magazine, again looking at the growth rates of China and India. And the way I view it is that we have visions of 10% growth dancing in our heads, which is wonderful. For India to get out of a situation where 700 million people survive on $2 a day, you need 10% growth. 5 or 6 or 7% just isn't going to do it. Okay, that is now seeming possible. So the finance minister presented his budget 10 days ago. What you might not have known is that within 48 hours of presenting that budget, he took a private plane, and guess where he came? He came to New York City. And he made a speech at Columbia University where he talked, I have the little quote from him, talking about, hey, if we do these things right, we can sustain growth rates of 9 to 10% for year on year for the next 10 or 20 years. That's the vision that they are looking forward to. And this is something that all Indian Americans should be really excited about, because it can finally start to get India closer to its full potential. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, now let's talk about US-India relations. And these slides are taken from Uncle Sam. This was a report published just before President Obama went to India. and it shows the growth of American exports to India of goods, but also amazingly of services. So many of us Indian Americans are used to hearing how Indians are taking jobs away from Americans. Okay, how the outsourcers, how the call centers are doing all of this stuff that is hollowing out the American economy. Well, the reality is that Indians are buying lots of American services. Bechtel is providing engineering services to India. Architects are designing buildings that are being built in India. American architects are. There are many, many services from the US that are being exported. And you can see the real data over the last 14 years in those graphs. So this is not imaginary at all. Okay, let's move on. Okay, we live right here in Southern California, and you might have heard a little bit about this in the last presentation, right? So the taxpayers of India have funded the purchase of 10 C-17 aircraft. These are large transport aircraft built right here in Long Beach, 6 miles from where we are sitting, right? The Indian government paid $4.5 billion for these aircraft, and now the Indian Air Force is the largest operator of the C-17, next only to the US Air Force. Okay? So for those of us who are faced with this situation at work or in social situations, I think it's important to realize that trade with the two countries is bilateral, and both countries win as a result. Okay? Particularly compared to China, I think it's important to understand and then emphasize that India recognizes intellectual property. The Indian government does not steal from American taxpayers. There's no organized piracy going on funded by the Indian government, as you see in China. So there are many, many good things about US-India trade that I think we should all keep in mind as Indian Americans. Okay. Let's move on. Okay. I won't spend much time on this slide. It's really talking about the potential of US-India trade. 6 years ago, I wrote an article for Business Week. At that time, US-India trade was $20 billion. And I predicted that very soon trade might reach $100 billion. And people thought I was crazy. Okay. Well, we crossed $100 billion already. And the latest vision now is that US-India trade could reach $500 billion, which is the level of trade that the US has today with China. Okay. And again, it seems a little crazy. India's GDP is only 1.8 trillion. Can 1/3 of that be with the US? Of course not. What will happen is that India's GDP will rise far, far beyond the $1.8 trillion. Okay? And I fully believe that if things go right in both governments, that it's very, very possible that we will cross that $500 billion mark by 2020, 2022 or so. Okay? I won't dwell in the details of the budget that just came out. How many of you are doing business with India here in the audience? Anybody? Just a couple? Okay. So anybody follow the budget announcements? Okay. There are a lot of good things that happened in this budget, and I grouped them in various categories. If you look at the free market believers in India, they are doing things now that were just unimaginable in a so-called socialist country. Getting rid of the wealth tax, right? It only corrected a few $100 million. Okay, but the idea of removing the wealth tax altogether is very much, a right-wing idea, if you will, right? But they had no controversy getting that through. Announcing a definite date on which the new GST will come into effect. Now that seems very technical, but the reality is that today India is like 29 different markets with 29 states. And I call this the Indian common market, just like we had the European common market happen 20 years ago. By introducing a standard GST across the country, you will all of a sudden be able to move goods and services across the country without all of this friction. Okay. There's many other points that I'm covering in there, which I won't dwell on right now, just to emphasize the social aspects as well. This government has now introduced insurance for the poorest, introduced healthcare for the poorest. And it's a small step, but it's a step in the right direction, where India hasn't had a social security net in the past. So I think we can look forward to movement across the entire spectrum, the poorest of the poor, as well as the people who are creating the jobs. They don't have to fear about taking their money and putting it overseas because of the wealth tax and other factors. So these are all very, very exciting changes that are happening in India. Probably not fast enough for many of us who live in the US, but much faster in India than we have seen in the past. So let's move to the next slide. We have a terrific panel for you. I've arranged the speakers in order of how far away they came from. So from WIPRO, we have Nitin Narkhede, who lives in Northern California. He's the CTO of Emerging Technologies for WIPRO America. We have Richard Swanson, who came all the way from South Orange County. Richard is the Regional Director of the U.S. Commercial Service. Your tax dollars and mine actually pay for the service that Richard's organization runs, which is to help American companies export their products all over the world. Okay, so we are very fortunate. Richard is the regional head of the U.S. Commercial Service, and we are very fortunate to have him here. We also have my friend Sunny Kalera, who is one of the leading business and tax lawyers in Southern California. He is also a physicist by training before he became an attorney, and an avid map collector. Maybe we'll get to talk about that a little bit, Sunny. Okay. We have Amit Rajnekar, who is the trade lane head for DHL, which is one of the largest logistics providers. They used to be called shipping companies, now they are called logistics providers because they actually provide a lot more than moving product from point A to B. And I think when you talk about US-India business, we need to think about how to get goods from there to here and goods from here to there. So we are fortunate to have Amit speaking with us. And I will try and elicit questions from the audience, and we are going to do something a little bit different, being the last panel of the day. Okay, so before I ask my speakers to come on board, I want to see what questions you have, and I'm going to pick on you. Yes, sir. And you have to speak loudly.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And tell us your name first.
My question is, in your charts, you talked about 10% growth for India. So I'd like you to answer, how is India going to achieve 10% growth year after year? And people always talk about problems with infrastructure in India. So what is going to be done to improve the infrastructure so that people feel good about doing business with India?
Okay, great questions. I'm not going to answer them right now because what I want to do is have the speakers weave in some of the answers, and then whatever is left over, I have a strong opinion on all of that. And I will give that in the end, but I want to have the limelight be on the speakers. So the question is, how can India achieve 10% growth? And what was the second part?
Infrastructure.
How will India overcome the infrastructure issues?
Right.
Okay. Let me go to another table. Yes, sir.
Do you think that removing the wealth tax is a best point for the economy to grow in India?
Can you repeat your question?
Removing the wealth tax. In our budget, Chetli has removed the wealth tax from the rich people. So do you think that it will help us in our economy to grow?
That's a great question, and again, I'll defer to our panelists, and then I can give you an opinion at the end. The question is, how could the removal of the wealth tax possibly help in the growth of the economy? Yes, sir.
The question is, we are sitting in Southern California, one of the biggest, largest port, and also largest port. We are NRI, we are the people from here who are educated. How we can help the U.S. company to export more? Particularly Indian community can do it, but we don't done much. If you look at the India growth, I had in numbers given by the port authorities last year. There's a tremendous growth if they can train to us. Like China did, they call all their people who be educated here and go back and they set up. I think there's a potential we like to answer. How U.S. department thinking to open consultancy, taking American company to back home, establish their export, making manufacturing hub in India.
Okay, so the question is, can Indian Americans do more to promote trade between the two countries, particularly export from the U.S.?
We can build another China. What we did in China is did here. We know that. We had a blueprint. We can done in India.
Absolutely. And let me answer that question very briefly from my point of view, and again, I'll defer to the speakers more. Sometimes as Indian Americans, we underrate ourselves. Okay, the successes of Indian Americans and the way that our society, our ethnic community has pervaded the American way of thinking. When you look at the hotel industry, dominated by Indian Americans. You look at physicians. Almost anybody you meet has an Indian American physician. You look at the heads of universities, whether it's Carnegie Mellon or the UC San Diego or the CSU system. The leaders have been Indian Americans. Okay. You look at companies the size of PepsiCo or Vodafone, they've been headed by people of Indian origin. But there's a lot that we have done as partly, I guess, as a result of our diverse society, partly as a result compared to the Chinese Americans, where we are more fluent in English and we are more adaptable in the culture. I don't know. But there's a lot that we have done. In the past, the support from the Indian government has been lacking. And that, I think, is changing in a very qualitative and quantitative way going forward. So those of us who work in this business are very excited about what the next decade is going to bring. There's still many things that could go wrong. Okay, there are many, many things that could go wrong, so it's not assured by any means. Okay. And again, I'll defer to the speakers for more on that. Let's move on with the presentations. And we have Sunny's slides up, so can we start with Sunny? We'll play it by ear here. Okay, Sunny, please come on up.
Well, very delighted to be here. I know you've heard lots of talks before, and on lots of different subjects. This one is probably something that really hits very close to your heart, which is the taxes and the legal aspects of it. In my law practice, to give you a sense of the scope of what we do and how we deal with many of those things, we specialize in business law, intellectual property, and asset protection. And part of that process, we encounter many clients who want to move to India, want to start business in India, want to do business in India, and as part of our estate planning practice, we have people who have properties in India, they want to deal with that, and many of those related issues that come up with that. So, and very often the first question that gets asked is, okay, I want to do that, what are my options, what are the choices? And I think people generally have some idea as to how things happen, but I want to do is to give you an overview of what options there are, what opportunities there are, what are the legal and tax implications there are, and at least give you a sense of what's needed. Every time I talk about Indian stuff, always reminds me of a friend of mine who is an actually aerospace engineer. He designs helicopters. He has a bunch of papers on it, and has written extensively. But sometime in the evening, he would be looking at some article in journal and looking at helicopters and so on, and he would throw the article up and say, I still don't understand how this damn thing flies. And when you look at some of the Indian stuff, how the Indian companies are structured, how the legal requirements are, how the tax structure is, I sometimes wonder how anything ever gets done there, and that's not, we are all familiar with the jugaad and we make two things and so on, but one of the things that you would see is that if you actually try to comply with all the laws that are applicable to things that you want to do, invariably, because they are so inconsistent, that you will actually violate 10% of that. That is happens. So if you can go to the next slide. What I want to do is to just give you an idea as to if you wanted to start a business in India, say I want to do, start a company there or do something there, I want to invest in it. What are your choices? What are the options there are? And there is a list here which says, we can have a direct foreign investment, you can have different types of foreign venture capital, you have portfolio stuff and so on. But instead of going through the list, let me give you two examples of actual typical clients that I have that I'm working with right now. And I think that may be helpful. The first one, actually turns out that both of them are in media, I mean not by design, but it just happens that way. The first one is a company that wants to start TV station in Chennai and a couple of other cities, a media company. So, when they come to me and say, what do I do now? What is my next step? Okay. Well, first of all, it's in media. So you need to look at what is a 5-year horizon as to what do you expect to do. Chances are that if you do it right, the company would grow, and the medias have generally done very well in India. So you do expect that the company would become reasonably big in 4 or 5 years. So we need to pay attention to how do we minimize taxes in 5 years or 10 years or whatever time frame. And once you do that, the next step would be what kind of structure that we set up in India. In their case, you might have heard that the most foreign investment in India actually happens through Mauritius. And the reason for that is that there is a treaty between Mauritius and India, which says that you only have to pay taxes in one of the countries, and Mauritius has 0 taxes. So everybody, including some of the Indians, including some of the people in the political arena there, start their business in Mauritius and then take it to India so that they have significant tax advantages. That is probably not going to last very long. I think in the last 3 or 4 years, we've already seen decline in that. The next country that is being used now is Singapore. Singapore is not tax-free in the sense that there is still a tax treaty between India and Singapore. You still pay taxes in Singapore, but that's only 2%. And so you're paying some taxes, but it's still a great deal of difference that makes in terms of your capital gains. Both Mauritius, I suspect that within next 2 or 3 or 4 years, the chances of being able to have a clean situation where you start something in Mauritius, go to India, is probably going to go away. But Singapore is still a good option because there are specific accounting stuff that has been set up. It has to have some business reason for doing that. You set up a company in Singapore that itself does some business. I think there is a requirement that you do business about $200,000 a year or something like that, and that allows you to take advantage of the tax treaty. So in this case, we know that the capital gain is going to be a big deal, so we're going to start a company in Singapore first. The Singapore company would actually go and start another company in India. Because it's a media company, we need to get all the appropriate, there are lots of regulations about how many percentage you can own and all of that. So you find local partners and make sure that the percentage that you own is the right percentage. Once you have that set up, you set up a company, a limited corporation, and with some percentage ownership, some accounting stuff, and then you start from there and go forward with all the stuff that you need to do. Another example, which is also in media, in which this is not a really money-making business, but the client wants to do is to set up a couple of magazines there which have a slight right slant, because the client believes that the way the Fox News Network has done here, which is that take the conservative approach of things and make it into sort of a mainstream, and people think of it as a news, but it's not really quite news kind of thing, So do something like that in India, but with a slight slant, so that the views that he has or views that he wants to espouse actually are heard. So for that purpose, we know that it is not going to be a money-making venture. It's like so for there going to Singapore doesn't make sense. What we need to do is to have essentially just start a company in India. He doesn't really care about getting his money back. I think he just things like so just wants to do the last, which is the PIO part, and just don't worry about getting the money back from there. Essentially do a simple company startup in there and continue business there. If it looks like the company is doing well and there are other opportunities that come up and the business model is successful, then perhaps we can think about different things. So so what you've done here is to look at what is your 5-year horizon. Based on that, you figure out what you need to do, and there are certain structure of doing that. So you can go to the next slide, please. So there are different forms of entities. I really don't want to go into it again. It's not too dissimilar from what we have in the US. There is an LLC and there is a company, and there are certain situations where you don't really want to deal with the Indian tax structure or something. You just want a presence there. There are ways of doing that as well. But generally, you found that all the things are available. Ultimately, what works is that you go to somebody who is already there, help you set it up, and then move forward from there. That is always the best way to do it. It saves you a lot of time, it saves you a lot of effort, it saves you a lot of hassle, and chances that you would make a mistake are also much less. So that's probably the best way to proceed with that. And having a local person there helping and being continuously available, I think makes a difference as well. So if you go to the next slide, please. Once you do that, there are the tax structure that comes in. And, it might sound like a long list of different taxes that are applicable, and I think that are actually true even here. It's just that, we are getting so used to them that we don't really notice it. If you look at, I mean, there is a sales tax here, there is an income tax, there is a tax related to the properties that you own, there is tax related to the services, there is a tax related to all of the taxes are present there as well, and even more so. But when you start making a list, it just looks like a lot. But each piece, there are local taxes that has to be paid to the local place where you are. There are state taxes that need to be paid to the state. There is central taxes that need to go to the central government. There are direct, indirect taxes. The point of all this is that when you are starting a company, you want to make sure that you have obtained appropriate the account numbers and registered with the right parties and so on and so forth, so that you are paying these taxes in the right time, in the right amount, and don't get in trouble because of that.
What is this transfer price? Can you please?
Right, sir. If we can go to the next, there are other taxes that we don't really talk about, which is the corruption and the bribery that one needs to do, and people have different views of it. Some people are really morally enraged by having to pay bribes, over time, I think I have mellowed on that situation. I mean, to me, it's like when you go to a restaurant and you pay a tip to waiter. I mean, you are not, it is his job to serve you anyway. You still pay the tip. Sometimes you pay 15%, sometimes you pay 20%. It's not related to what services you got either. So if you start thinking of it as I'm not condoning this, but I think generally, if you ultimately you want to get the business done, so do whatever you need to, and just think of it as yet another tax that needs to be paid to make the things go faster. I think of it as a speed tax or something. So that just again, I mean, I'm not condoning it, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't try hard, like the Modi is suggesting to do to get rid of it. But I don't want to be the guinea pig trying to get rid of it. I want to be, I want to focus on my business and get it done. So then, if you can go one before that, just a second. The labor law. This is the part that requires a lot of attention and very easy to make a mistake. And as the people at Wharton said, that if you try to comply with all the labor laws that are applicable to anybody that you hire, there is no possible way to do it. The 10% of would not work. It is somewhat of a marriage contract when you sign up to somebody, marriage contract without a possibility of a divorce. So what happens ultimately is that you figure out some sort of an informal way of getting it done. You have some contracts but not fully done. And some withholdings that are not. I don't want to come across sounding as if I'm suggesting that you violate the applicable laws. I'm not saying that. But ultimately, the business needs to get done, and that's what we need to focus on. And you do what you need to. If you can go to the next slide, please. Given all of this structure, we have the different entity structure, we have the different taxes to be paid, we have different labor laws, and so on and so forth. All of that you do in India. Now, if you are starting a business from here, there are two issues that I've noticed that are going to come up quite a bit. And those two are, one is the FBAR, which is the disclosure of your financial assets. And the second one is, the first one is the financial accounts, and the second one is the foreign financial assets. These are slightly different. In one case, you have to declare how much money you have in a foreign bank. Typically money, it can include other things as well. And it is a trap for unwary. I mean, it's very easy to forget to do that or not pay attention to it. And I know people who have tried to move their money from one bank to the other, go to a smaller bank so that nobody would notice it or something like that. But ultimately we know that every bank is going to get electronic records, and ultimately it's going to get caught. So that issue of disclosing what you have becomes an important one. The penalties related to not disclosures are very high. So it is a good idea to ensure that all that compliance gets done. There is a voluntary program to describe to let IRS know that something has happened, and I think this is probably the good time to take advantage of it if things have not been done. The second part, which is actually just came out a couple of years ago, which is the disclosure of financial assets. So when we talked about the financial accounts, all you needed to do was disclose what bank account you had, how much money you had in the bank account. Now things have gotten further up, and now you disclose not just the bank account, but also if you own shares in the company or not, if you know. And other assets that are more financial in nature, but a little broader than just the bank account. The impact of that is somewhat immediate, somewhat, for example, when people want to buy real estate in India, I would very often suggest to them that, hey, it's better to get a company and have that company buy real estate in India, so that when you want to transfer it, you don't have to sell the company per se, you don't have to sell the real estate per se, you can just sell the shares of the company, so essentially you're transferring the ownership. There are lots of advantages of doing that as well, but now there is one more quote-unquote disadvantage that, if you do that, you have to disclose that in a certain way. I strongly believe that I think ultimately that would be a good thing. I think there is a lot of black-white issues that happen in all the real estate and so on and so forth, and I think this would help resolve many of those issues. But these are the two things that are important, something to keep mind of. The last thing I want to touch on is that when you start a company, if you are in US and starting a company in India, and there are interactions that happen between the two companies, there is something called the transfer pricing issue that comes up, which is that how much money the US company is charging, how much profit the Indian company is making, and so on. Very complicated rules, but there are some safe harbor provisions there, which is that if your Indian company, if it's in software and is making about 20% profit, then you're probably okay. If it is less than that, then the government would look at it to see whether it is done right or not. If it is R&D, that number is about 30%. If it is in manufacturing, that safe harbor number is about 10%. So, depending upon where you are and so on and so forth, you need to pay attention to all your accounting, first of all, and secondly, you want to make sure that, the amount that the Indian company is making is sufficient to not get trapped into this transfer pricing thingy, which creates additional penalties, additional headaches, and so on and so forth. So overall, the point that I would make is that, this is an exciting time to be doing business in India. There are lots of new and good things are happening. There are new situations that Modi is presenting, and a lot of simplification that is going on. The labor law is being simplified and all of that. Things are still complicated, but they are still manageable. And given the right structure, given the right advice, given the right people in India, all of that can be managed. And I have no doubt that, being that done, you would thrive in Indian market and participate in the growth of the company. Thank you.
So I have the first question. When a company comes to the US, they have to decide which state to incorporate in. And it seems like the most popular state is Delaware, and then there's some people who like to incorporate in Nevada for reasons I don't quite understand. So in India, out of the 29 states, is there one that you recommend more than others?
Actually, the answer is it depends on how much money you're going to put in. If you are going to put in 10 million rupees or something like that, I think Gujarat is better. If you are going to put in less than that, Maharashtra is better. There are some distinction between how much fees you pay depending on which state you are. And the difference is not very much, but I think when you are at the level of 10 million rupees, that difference could be as much as 15-20% of the tax, something like that. So, one could look at it that way and decide based on that. Okay. So.
Now, do you want to address some of the questions that came up earlier from the audience?
I don't remember any of them.
The 10% growth, the wealth tax.
Sure, I'll address some of them. The 10% growth part is, the numbers that you look at in the growth. I have my own views as to, as you might have seen, that those numbers have suddenly jumped up in the last 6 months. And that is because some accounting changes were made. So I'm not sure whether it actually accurately reflects what's going on.
Gujarati accounting?
Yeah, both the accounting. I'm not opposed to that accounting. It's just that it just shows more than what the reality of things is. The growth pattern. Things are going to happen, and if there is money to be made, people will figure it out. And I think if you try to match everything, have everything timing to be perfect for everything, nothing will go on. So we just got to we know we don't have good infrastructure for moving things, but when the money comes in, we'll figure it out. That's what my thinking is.
Okay, questions? Yeah.
Sunny, you do estate planning here and
Yes.
trusts and you sell things. Have you seen the same in India? Do you help people that have huge properties there that are green card holders but not US?
Right. We have done that. We have.
Repeat the question, sir.
Yes, the question is, that we do estate planning, that is for people in the US. Do we do estate planning stuff for people in India? And the answer is yes. We have done that for select people, especially when there is a large estate involved, both real estate and otherwise. There are very specialized techniques of wealth transfer.
Okay.
And one technique that I will briefly talk about is the life insurance, in which I'll give you one example of that. One family, 3 kids, and 3 kids ran 3 businesses. 3 businesses, one of them was worth 50 million, other one was 20 million, the third one was 10 million. Now, when you do the estate planning, you want to make sure all 3 kids have similar stuff. So how do you do that? So the idea was that you buy life insurance of reasonable amount, and then proceed of the life insurance pays them. But you buy the life insurance in US, so the money gets paid in US, although the premium gets paid from India. So there are ways of doing that. It's a very esoteric field, but it can be done. And there are but this idea of the trusts and so on doesn't quite work in India. This is
Thanks so much, Sunny. I'm told we need to move on to next speaker. Thanks so much. Okay, Richard, would you like to come up next?
Actually, can I ask Amit to maybe go before?
Oh, yes, okay, sure, absolutely. Okay. So Amit, as I mentioned earlier, is with DHL and lives like I do right here in Cerritos. Here's Amit.
Thanks, Gunjan. Yeah, it was a very long drive for me. It's 2 blocks. So, well, I'm looking forward to this discussion. First and foremost, thank you very much, Gunjanji, for allowing me to speak here on a very esteemed panel. We have some very, very exciting speakers coming up. And thank you to NFIA for the opportunity to speak here. Anyone that is involved in the international trade with India, like Gunjanji mentioned earlier, should be very excited. Should be very excited because there's some very tangible measures that the political establishments in both countries are taking, and all of you that have been following the news recently can see what is happening on a country level, right? So what I'm going to talk about here is broken up into 3 broad categories. First and foremost, we'll talk about the country dynamics. Where does India-US trade stand today and where it's heading? Secondly, we'll talk about some key facts and figures and statistics in terms of what the numbers look like. And finally, we'll talk about the logistics landscape in India. There was some mention about infrastructure issues and corruption and so on and so forth. I won't give my personal views here on this forum, but we'll talk about what the reality on the ground is. Yep. All right, if you can move on to the next slide, please. All right, so let's see what has happened first and foremost in the last 24 years, right? From 1990 to 2014. The trade in terms of merchandise goods, bilateral trade between India and US has gone up from a mere 5.6 billion in 1990 to $66.9 billion in 2014, right? That represents a 1,094% increase in bilateral trade. If you throw in the export of services, because this is just merchandise export, if you throw in the export of services, that number goes up to 100 billion, right? That's as far as bilateral trade is concerned. And from a political establishment standpoint, 1947, since India's independence, to 1999, in a span of 52 years, we had 3 presidential visits from the US, starting with President Eisenhower, Carter, and Nixon. And nearly in the last 15 years, from 2000 to 2015, We have had 4 presidential visits, 2 of them coming from the current President Obama over the last 8 years. So that, first and foremost, represents the commitment, like I mentioned earlier, on both the political establishments to make things move forward. And I think that's the starting point, because till you don't have that, there's no reform, there is no concrete measures, no tangible laws and trade facilitations that's going to help increase or boost trade. So I think that, like Gunjanji was saying, is really sets the groundwork or the framework for why this is such an exciting time in the India-US trade lane, right? So you can move on. All right, so I won't spend too much time on this slide. Essentially, it gives you a snapshot. And just going back to the previous slide, so that number, sorry, can you go back to the previous slide? And just, there's one important fact that I forgot to mention is the vision for the India-US trade lane, or what Modi and Obama have established in terms of what the numbers should come up to. That number is, the $100 billion is basically they want it to go up 5-fold to $500 billion over the next 10 years, which basically means that India does as much bilateral trade as China does today, right? That really is the vision for the India-US trade lane, okay? So in terms of facts and figures, in terms of the actual movement of goods, merchandise goods between the India and US, on the India import US trade lane, basically we moved in 2014 97,913 tons of air freight, right, which is 97 million kilos, and 565,000 containers inbound from India to the US. On the export side, which is a number that is rapidly increasing, the exports to India, as India continues to grow as a consumption market, that number is significantly improving. But the air freight tonnage on an export side, 43,000 tons exported to, from US to India last year, and 302,000 containers, right? In terms of major goods that were exported and imported, I'll leave it to Richard because I think you have some portion of that in your presentation, so we won't try to be repetitive on that. But of course, that landscape is changing, and like I said earlier, India has been, over the last many years, has been a manufacturing ground, and that's what is changing. India is now also starting to become a big consumption ground and a big market for US companies to sell their product in, right? Okay, you can move on, please. All right, this is a good graphical representation because I'm going to go back to, again, what Gunjanji mentioned. There was a question, and hopefully I'll try to address that here, but there was a question around where you mentioned we underrate ourselves a little bit. What was that point again? Someone made that point.
What can Indian Americans do, or what are they not doing?
Okay, I won't talk about what we can do, but I want to talk about what the reality on the ground is, because it's not so bad, right? What can we do? There's always room to improve, but we're already in a very good position right now, right? The Logistics Performance Index is what we're going to look at. Logistics Performance Index is an interactive benchmarking tool which helps countries identify the challenges and opportunities they face in performance on trade logistics, right? This is published by the World Bank every year, and it's on their website. If you Google World Bank LPI, Logistics Performance Index, you will pull up all this information, right? And it basically ranks on a scale of 1 to 5, 160 countries in terms of where they stand, and they score countries based on their logistics performance. There's 6 broad criteria that they use in terms of what that logistics landscape means, and those 6 criteria are, first and foremost, the efficiency of customs and border management, which is customs clearance, and how smooth or easy it is to do customs clearance in a country. That's a major factor in terms of how trade can develop. The quality of trade and transport and infrastructure, so the facilities, the rail network, the roads, so on and so forth. The ease of arranging competitively priced shipments, so purely demand-supply situation, what are the capacities, the carrier options, so on and so forth. And finally, the ability to track and trace, so technology in a nutshell, right? Where is my shipment today? And finally, the frequency with which shipments reach consignees within a scheduled or expected delivery time. How reliable is in India as far as manufacturing goods and getting those goods in a timely fashion across the ocean is concerned, right? So those are the 6 broad criteria. And if you look at the ranking, can everybody see that okay? Not really? Okay, so I'll talk to it. But what I mentioned earlier, the picture is not so bad, because if you look at 8 countries, and what I've done is I've picked the 8 countries which are most relevant. First 4 being the most advanced economies, or the top 4 ranking countries: Germany, Singapore, the US, and to a certain extent South Korea. Bless you. And then a comparison of the BRICS countries: Brazil, China, India, and Russia. And if you look at the average score, Germany, of course, was number 1 in 2014, the easiest place to do business from a trade logistics standpoint and from a standpoint of being able to move goods efficiently. So India's ranking was 54 out of 160 countries. Now, although that ranking can be improved, and I think it will improve over the next couple of years significantly as these reforms come into play, but if you compare it to the BRICS countries, with the exception of China, we're better than both Russia and Brazil, right? India was at 3.08 logistics performance index, Brazil at 2.94, and Russia at 2.69, right? Of course, there is room for improvement. Of course, there is, but there is also the reality of challenge on infrastructure. India's pace of growth is outpacing its speed of infrastructure development, right? So that's one of the reasons why it is where it is at 54. But I think that is going to significantly improve over the next few years. In terms of the 6 criteria: timeliness, tracking and tracing, logistics service quality, ease of shipments, infrastructure, and customs. You can see the rating that India has in comparison to the US, slightly lower or significantly lower in some cases, but again, that keeps changing, and that will improve significantly, we're hoping, over the next few years, right? All right, so what needs to be done, or what has to happen for India to improve on its logistics rating? So if you go to the next slide, that slide actually talks to what needs to change. And basically, I'm going to talk about 2 broad categories. First and foremost, India needs to build the right assets and extract more from existing assets. What that means is projects like establishing dedicated zones for export, establishing foreign trade zones in India that facilitate trade not only in India but within the Southeast Asia, South Asia region, upgrading the port infrastructure, and that is starting to happen too. If you've again been following the logistics landscape in India, new ports have come into operations over the last few years, and that continues to be the case. Faster and better maintenance of roads, optimizing cost with current assets, for example, using shared trucks and multi-user warehouses where there's common space, and there's that way cost containment, and of course multimodal transport. So improving the efficiency of our rail and road network. So that is as far as building the right assets is concerned. The next element of it is creating enablers to maximize the efficient use of assets. So really optimizing the assets that we have in place, right? Which is again going to come from, I think we touched upon it earlier, the GST. The GST coming into force in 2016 is a big, huge step in facilitating business in India. I have to, go back to your code. India right now operates as 29 different countries with 29 different tax structures and completely different set of taxation policies as far as international trade is concerned. So I think that with the GST is going to make things far easier to operate in India. Just to give you an example, we see this often in our business. If we send a shipment to a wrong destination incorrectly, and it can happen a lot, right? It can happen a lot. We send a shipment to Delhi instead of going to Chennai. It is actually more efficient and easier to bring that whole shipment back to the US and re-export it to Chennai than have it delivered simply from, within the country, just because of the taxation policies, right? So that's a little complex because of how we're positioned on the taxation front, and that, I think, will change with the GST coming into play. Okay, you can move on to the next slide, please. All right, I just want to end on an optimistic note, right? Because we may talk about all these challenges and all these issues with infrastructure and so on and so forth, but we have a case that is India has the expertise and the skill set to achieve logistics excellence. The Dabbawalas in my hometown of Mumbai have proved that, right? They've proved that with showing that in such a complex logistics environment, I don't know, is anyone from here from Mumbai? All know Dabbawalas, absolutely. But do you know how they operate?
Well, you have seen the movie Lunchbox.
Right? Within the 1 hour that they need to deliver lunches to all these professionals doing business, they carry out 8 million transactions, and there's one error amongst those 8 million transactions. So, long story short, India has the skill set and the logistics expertise. We've proven it. The Dabbawalas have become a big case study, in the topmost colleges, the business management schools and whatnot. So that's where I'm going to finish. I am going to also give you one more slide on how we are positioned as an organization in India. DHL as a group has a very long history in India. The first business unit was established in 1979. We have obviously more than 30 years of logistics experience in India, more than 16,000 employees, and of course, trucks and as well as freighter aircrafts and so on and so forth. So again, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I guess we can take them now related to logistics.
Any quick questions for Amit? Okay, I have a question for you. In addition to shipping, I understand that DHL also runs these free trade warehouse zones where you do some light assembly and so on. So is that, if you can talk for a minute about that and the impact of this Make in India movement, is that going to be a good thing for DHL?
Yeah, certainly. It's not only going to be a good thing for DHL, but I think it's going to be a good thing for the Southeast Asia region. The concept, yes, DHL doesn't only provide transportation, but also provides value-added services in India. As we see different sectors opening up for foreign investment, one of the sectors that opened up, or one of the areas that opened up for private operators was the foreign trade warehousing concept, right? Because that didn't exist in India till a few years ago. So we do operate a foreign trade warehousing zone, which is a new concept for India. We have 2 foreign trade warehousing facilities in Mumbai and Chennai, and we're expanding further in northern India as well. And what a foreign trade warehousing zone means is the ability to store goods. This is land that is, although is in India, is deemed a foreign zone, which means you can enter that facility without paying taxes or duties until the consumption it has to happen in India. So let's say for a US company that does business in South Asia or Southeast Asia, they now have the ability to ship goods to India, store it in a foreign warehousing zone, and basically utilize or remove goods from that facility based on consumption, depending on whichever country that may be used for. Typically South Asia, Southeast Asia is a good fit for India. Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So, I'm sure many of you are familiar with WIPRO as an IT services company. My first interaction with WIPRO was on their consumer products business, where they make lighting and soap and all kinds of other products. That was the original business for WIPRO. And some of you might know that when Azim Premji was at Stanford, I think his father passed away and he moved back to India to take over the company and expand it. And now most of us know primarily the IT and the technology side, but they still run that entire gamut of businesses. And we're very fortunate to have Mr. Nitin Narkhede from WIPRO, who is a graduate of the University of Pune and IIT Madras, and has been with the company off and on for over 20 years, and has played a role in many, many different sectors, from retail to manufacturing to logistics. So he might have some comment on the DHL business as well. And please come on up, Nitin.
Thanks, Gunjan. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to start, my talk with a little introduction about WIPRO's IT business. Next slide, yes. So WIPRO's IT business, is a global business. We are present in 60 countries. in about 175 cities across 6 continents. WIPRO's revenues last year were $6.6 billion. We work with 1,000 odd customers, have our employee base up over 150,000. If you look at the US footprint of WIPRO, 50% of WIPRO's business comes from US. We employ about 12,400 people in the US. And we talk about job creation. Today morning I was reading a news that Mercedes-Benz is opening a manufacturing plant, and they're going to employ 3,000 employees. WIPRO in last 5 years have created 9,000 jobs, 9,000 high-paying jobs in US. We also have a lot of assets in the US. We have 5 data centers across the country. And we have about 500 large US corporations as our customers. So Gunjan talked about WIPRO's journey. WIPRO started out as a cooking oil company, mainly working in the commodities area. Then moved on to build consumer products. And when the opportunity was presented to WIPRO and all the other Indian companies, when most of the multinational corporations went out of India in the 80s, WIPRO started IT products for domestic market. Eventually, Indian market opened up. You got a lot of competition from outside, and WIPRO essentially pivoted into services. And we built a very strong services business, and so did some of WIPRO's competitors. And now we are essentially looking at next level of growth and businesses that would drive further growth for WIPRO. So it's really looking at new areas, new opportunities in technology to grow the business, and also replace some of the business that is becoming non-competitive, or that's in fact even going away, because the technology cycles are fairly quick. A lot of what you do today gets either automated, or there is no need for those services anymore, because people have moved on, or your customers have moved on to new technologies. So I'll talk a little bit about India's IT industry. A lot of this data comes from the industry body called NASSCOM. I'm sure many of you are aware of NASSCOM. If you look at the current footprint of IT services, and I'm including IT services as well as business process outsourcing, and the product companies, or product outsourcing business that some of these companies have. It's about 9.5% of India's GDP today. So it's a significant sector for India, and it continues to be so. It has last 20 years. It has really been an engine of growth for India in terms of exports, and it continues to do so. We have about 7,000 firms, 7,000 companies that work in this sector. Obviously the bigger companies are a lot bigger. They are in $7 to $10 billion range, but there are a lot of small companies that provide different services to both domestic customers as well as international customers. The sector employs about 3.5 million people, and this sector probably has the best diversity. More than a third of workforce is women in IT industry. So, and if you look at the global share, we are about 55% of global IT services, share that WIPRO has, and 67% of services that are, out of US are provided by India. So, and by number, it would be about 100 billion this year. And, so 60% of that, 60 billion is actually coming from US. India also has a large domestic market. We have 1.2 billion, consumers. And, if you look at numbers, there are about 250 million internet users, about 900 million mobile connections, about 125 million smartphone users, right? So it's a very, very large market. India has about over 40 million small and medium enterprises. That's, again, a very, very, very large IT market, both for Indian companies as well as for US companies. I came across a news item that this year, the SME, small and medium enterprises in India would buy about $50 billion worth of IT. India also obviously has, number of large corporations, about 5,000 of them. 65 of them are on Forbes 2000 list, and 3,500 of them are publicly traded companies. So very, very large domestic market. Another thing we have going in India is, very, very strong activity in the startup ecosystem. There are about 3,100 startups in India today. Largely concentrated in New Delhi and Bangalore area, but it's catching up elsewhere in the country. If you rank the countries, India is the 4th largest country in terms of number of startups. Behind US, UK, Israel, and then India. India also has disproportionate share of private equity and venture capital investment going from US. It's about $4+ billion is what is invested in India. If you look at where this is going, there is a plan to have about 20,000 startups in India by 2020. And there are initiatives in place. The ecosystem is getting built, both from the government side, from the associations like NASCOM, and also from the corporate side. There's good deal of interest from companies both from India and from US to create incubators for startups in India. So, if you look at IT industry, over a couple of decades, can we go to the next slide? You have seen, there was, age of mainframe computers, and that drove IT investment, and then it stabilized. Then there was a next wave of personal computers and open systems. There was a huge investment, that corporations did. Then that stabilized. Then we moved to network, the internet and the networking. That drove next wave of IT investment. And we have a lot going on now. Actually, it's not just one trend, but we have cloud computing, we have mobile, we have Internet of Things, big data. All of this is driving new set of investments. If you look at this whole digital economy, that's coming up, it's estimated that it would be 20% of US GDP by 2020. So there's a whole lot that that's going on on technology and how the technology is applied to the real world. And so where is that where are those opportunities essentially, how that technology is going to be applied. So you would have heard of a lot of these things, augmented reality, you would have heard about a company called Oculus Rift. So augmented reality is an area, that would, that would grow beyond gaming. It will have a lot of real-world applications. Similarly, sensors and mobile computing, that is going to grow, and going to be multi-billion-dollar business. Use of artificial intelligence, we hear about it a lot. You would have heard from Stephen Hawking to Bill Gates to even Elon Musk talking about artificial intelligence and what it would do to jobs and economies. But that's happening, right? And a lot of it right now is just making things more efficient and increasing quality of interactions with the consumers and increasing the quality of services. No one knows the long-term effects of this, but it's definitely a big business opportunity for IT companies. And obviously, you'd have heard about robotics and drones. That's another area that's going to grow, and there are really compelling applications of these technologies, across many different sectors. So that's basically going to drive that 20% of the GDP that I talked about, and you see some of that happening today, with companies like Uber, Airbnb, and things like that, and that's going to grow. So that's pretty much what I had. Yeah, that was my last slide. Yeah. So I'll stop here and take the questions.
Are there any questions for Nitin? Anybody? No? Okay, we'll try and have some questions.
Sure. So your comment on what we are doing in logistics, right? So as I said, there is a lot going on in terms of sensors and so you talk about track and trace, right? What if you want to also know if your package was dropped, damaged, what sort of environment condition it would have been, temperature, humidity, and things like that. You can get that information in real time with sensors. So those are the kinds of things that would come in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. So every year for about the last 8 years, I've been speaking at an event called the Asia Pacific Business Outlook Conference, organized by the University of Southern California. And every year for most of those 8 years, I've had an opportunity to interact with our next speaker, who isn't just the token white guy on this panel, and he's not going last because of that. He asked to go last. Okay, Richard Swanson, as I've said, heads the commercial service for Hawaii, Nevada, and California. And so when I don't see him at an event, I know that he must be in Hawaii. Richard has a master's degree in public policy. He lives in South Orange County in Laguna Niguel and has been with the commercial service for 25 years. The commercial service has many operations in India as well, okay? And he's going to tell us a little bit about that and the relevance of the commercial service for Indian Americans and for US-India business. So thank you so much, Richard. Come on up.
Boy, it sounds like an earthquake. Watch out. We're in California. It's one of those days where it's sort of warm and there could be an earthquake, because growing up here, it seems like earthquakes have kind of happen in these change of weather days, where we go from kind of a little colder to warmer. But thank you, Gunjan, for inviting me to be up here, and I'll try to make this a little quicker because I think I'm between you and whatever is on the other side of that wall. But I've been to this hotel on occasion for India conferences, and it seems like this is a great center point. So thank you to the National Federation of Indian American Associations, really, for bringing us together today. You know, I represent the U.S. Department of Commerce. That's a cabinet-level agency, department within the U.S. federal government, headed by our President, Barack Obama. And I have the pleasure to serve under his cabinet appointee, Penny Pritzker, who is the U.S. Secretary of Commerce. In India, John McCaslin, my colleague and friend, who's been with the commercial service almost as long as I have, is our Minister Counselor of Commercial Affairs in New Delhi. And Richard Verma is the U.S. Ambassador at the U.S. Embassy there. He's been there since December of last year, so he's sort of a newbie. But I think the most significant thing from our perspective is President Obama's visit this January, as we've already mentioned. I think they lays the groundwork for the year ahead. The year ahead. Nitin, did I hear you correctly that WIPRO created 9,000 jobs in the United States or India?
U.S.
Yes. I think that's our future. You know, it just occurred to me, and one of the reasons I asked Gunjan
So Richard, one data point I missed is in the last 10 years, WIPRO has invested about $1 billion in U.S.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And you know, I think the entrepreneurial spirit between India and California is very similar. I was just with the CEO of OSI, the owner of Rapiscans, a security manufacturer here in Torrance. So whenever you go through the airport, sometimes you'll see the Rapiscan brand. That's the metal detection. But they do a lot more than that. And Deepak Chopra, the CEO and chairman of the board of OSI, the parent of Rapiscan, just has an amazing entrepreneurial spirit. And I think in California, I think with the ability to engage in the language and the culture and the history, I know that we opened up our first U.S. American embassy in November. I was just reading November 1st of 1946. So it was prior to the establishment of the government of India. And since then, we've had commercial relations, and we have 7 offices in India. And so we're in Chennai, Hyderabad, Bangalore, your headquarters, New Delhi, and so forth. And the way we operate in the U.S. and foreign commercial services, we have economic development offices here in California, Nevada, Arizona, across the United States. But overseas, we have a commercial section within the U.S. Embassy. So the Department of Commerce is separate from the U.S. Embassy in that the U.S. Embassy, by virtue of the ambassador, is part of the state system, the Department of State. So in that case, that would be Secretary of State Kerry, who oversees all of the U.S. embassies across across the world. But within the embassy and the consulates, we have the commercial section, and we're there to promote trade, mutually, might I add, mutually beneficial trade. But also trade and services, as we noted. We had, did we note $100 billion in total trade? And that is supposed to increase. I think the rate of GDP growth by the end of this year is supposed to be 7.4%. And in comparison to China, what we're hearing is that China is beginning to set targets below double digits for the first time. So you can see the world growth is slowing down a little bit in terms of just the double-digit growth. Our year, last year, we finally got the last trade statistics. The Census Bureau is within the Department of Commerce. So we got our 2014 statistics. We had 2.35 billion in goods of exports, the largest exports we've ever done. But I have to say, look out for the future. I think we'd all agree that the rising dollar in comparison to the rupee and the rest of the currencies in the world may put a little bit of a slowdown in possibly the goods export side of things. This might be beneficial for the service exports and the connectivity between our two countries. So I'm looking forward to see where that leads us in the next year. But we also are seeing an increase in Indian-U.S. foreign direct investment on both sides. And in a few weeks, we'll have our second annual Select USA conference in Washington, D.C. area. And many of the economic development organizations from overseas and from the United States will be there. In fact, we have over 2,300 registered participants at this conference, and it will be held March 23rd through March 24th. And it's all about foreign direct investment. And we're trying to provide a platform here in the United States to make it easier. You know, this was sort of amazing, but we only were given the authority. This is the crazy thing about America. We assume that people want to come to California, right? That's just one state out of 49. And yet, we don't have a policy to attract foreign direct investment in the United States since about 7 years ago. Can you believe that? So only now, in the 7th year, do we have a Select USA foreign direct investment policy. Now, you all probably know of the United States Citizen and Immigration Service. They have EB-5, visa investment programs, and that sort of thing, and that's all good. But a foreign direct strategy, foreign direct investment strategy for our overseas markets back here hasn't been in place, and only been in place for 7 years. So we're beginning to shift our focus from only exports of goods and services to actually foreign direct investment. So I want you to leave here knowing that the 3 buckets that the U.S. government plays in, with every country in the world, I might add, we're all in this game. If you can picture this room as a football field, we're all playing in the same game. It's all about exports, it's all about imports, and it's all about direct investment on both sides of the equation. And it's good that we have this harmonious entrepreneurial spirit, and that we use our diaspora here. I think the California India diaspora alone is one of the most invested diasporas. And California is really a nice platform for the Pacific Rim, if you think about it. We have a lot of great diasporas here, the Korean diaspora, the Vietnamese diaspora. We have the Hispanic diaspora here. We have the Chinese. We have the the Indus Entrepreneurial Association, Thai. All these groups come out of California and have a great entrepreneurial spirit. So, Sonny talked a little bit about the legal aspects. That was a fantastic presentation, Sonny. And, you know, I would always advise there's a legal aspect of trade, there's a logistical aspect of trade. Thank you very much, Amit. There's also the private sector perspective. I think we had government, logistics, private sector, and legal. That's a great panel, Gunjan. Way to go on that. Just a couple things about some strategies that maybe you and I could go forward with. One might be in the area of the consumer growth in India with sort of branded products from the United States. Gunjan and I were just recently at a major trade show here in Anaheim called the Natural Products Expo Show. And we spent a couple days there, and I would say there were so many brands, I couldn't tell whether they were Indian brands, US brands, Chinese brands, Korean brands, and yet they were all geared towards natural products, nutritional supplements, and products that are there to make you healthy and give you a long, long life, and a good quality of life too. And you know, retail and branded products like that going into some of these developed countries like China and India is something for us to think about here in Southern California, and using your connections to see if we can grow the business both ways. So there's a lot of agricultural products and exports. California is a huge exporter. In fact, what's the name of the company that produces, I was just talking about this with our group, there's a lot of alternative dairy products that come from California now and from the United States. A lot of folks are moving away from just pure homogenized milk products to milk byproducts that are made up of almonds, of all things. And if you've ever tasted almond milk by chance, it's great over granola. Put some blueberries in there. It's just fantastic for us guys. But things like that are growing, and it's an opportunity for us to tap into the consumer market for both India and here in the United States. I see that as a major growth opportunity for us here in California. We have a lot of good brands, but you know, our style of trading in the world, like Europe, and Europe's been in India a lot longer than us, is that we do connect, we do outsource. A lot of inshoring has been taking place in the last 5 years. President Obama made a pledge 5 years ago, if you recall, of basically doubling exports. You know, that's like saying, 5 years ago in 2010, that's like saying, we want to put a man on the moon in 1960, which is what John F. Kennedy said. Well, it took him 9 years. It probably would take us 10 or 15 years to do that, but if we count the inbound tourism, if we count the inbound education and training, if we count the services, which even though we say we're 70 billion in exports, yet we can extrapolate and say that we're 30 extra billion in services, I'm not sure if the math works. I'm not sure, even from commerce, we're not as good at calculating the number of service transactions in IT services or financial services or legal services or travel and tourism or education and training. That's an area where government has to get better, because that is our future, I think, in California, the service sector. But it's also having branded products, too. And there are some challenges to the retail market. From what my colleagues and I have discovered, 8.8 million retail outlets across 6,000 towns. This is the market for foreign-produced consumer goods. I think the Indian consumer is really demanding. And I think what was pointed out today is the hardest thing that retail and consumer growth will encounter is the logistics. Did we say that 29 of the states, or 29 individual markets with 29 separate rules and regulations and it was cheaper to actually take a shipment from Delhi back to, let's say, the port of Los Angeles, which, by the way, everyone, the port problem is solved. If you, I know that we've been talking about that, and I have to say kudos to our Secretary of Labor. I have heard from many folks that he did play a role in that, and so that was good to see a unified approach. And so for now, I keep seeing the number of ships dwindling from the harbor on a clear day. It was up to 50 one time, 33, and I think we're down into the teens. So we're getting there.
Just to be accurate on that, it's easier to do, because we export and ship it back, not cheaper.
Okay, easier, not cheaper, yes. Are you familiar with a trade act that we enacted back in the 1930s as a result of the Great Depression, called the Jones Act, where we have to ship U.S. carriers within? So it's almost easier with Hawaii to make the product here and ship it there instead of make it in Hawaii and ship it out to, let's say, India. Now, some of these things with logistics have to do with infrastructure. I see another part of the growth part of India in infrastructure. Lots of opportunity. I think California is on the precipice of developing a very nice high-speed rail kind of strategy and system There's a lot of play in that area. I think that technology and that market could bode well in India as well. I think California and India have a lot of shared interests and a lot of shared problems and a lot of shared entrepreneurialism spirit. So a lot of great brands, didn't put this up there, but a lot of great brands still in India and moving into India. India is very open to U.S. branding, U.S. branded products. I think some of the growth sectors, like I said, are going to be in some of the agribusiness areas. I would also say that renewable energy is big. I think there is a goal to get to the gigawatt phase of power production. We have a company here that we work with, I'll leave nameless, but what they do is they develop power generation products that enable regular telephone and transmission lines to transmit more energy per second, per hour, per kilowatt than if you didn't have it. It's a very good product. They have a lot of business ties in India. It's a huge growth market. But it's like you said, it's fractured in that they're dealing differently in different parts of southern India versus other parts of the country. And that's where we come in. We're there to facilitate. We're not there to enforce. The U.S. Department of Commerce, we're very particular about our export controls, let me tell you that. We want to make sure our IT products do not get into the wrong hands, so we have very strict rules. We have a great military and aerospace connection. A lot of my staff do aerospace shows, defense shows with India. We sell a lot of parts, legacy parts. So the aerospace industry here, if anybody works for that, is a huge market for us in India. I find that to be one of our top sectors. I think India and California also share issues with water. I was with the U.S. ambassador just this week. She was visiting Southern California, and Brazil has water issues. Places like Sao Paulo are now rationing out. You only get water 12 hours a day. So, you know, if California keeps having days like today, I think I clocked me getting off of Carmenita at 91 degrees on the thermometer there. That's pretty hot for early March, I think, isn't it? I don't recall it, yeah. And my colleague is up doing some consulting up in Anchorage today, and they're an hour behind us. And we were going to chat later, and I asked her how warm it was there, and she said 40 degrees. So that's hot in Anchorage in March, too. So I don't know what's going on, and then we're being frozen in the eastern part of the United States. So things are happening, but if you've been in California, you know we've had droughts. You remember the drought of 1998 to 2004. So those are some shared. There's some barriers in India. I think the biggest one, we need to be price sensitive and the U.S. dollar. So if we have a chance to chat afterwards, I'm available throughout the afternoon. My office is in Irvine. We have some offices in LA, San Diego, San Jose, San Francisco, Reno, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Tucson, on this part of the United States, and in Honolulu as well. So if you're in these areas and you want to reach out to us, happy to go further with your product or your idea, or giving you some market intelligence. My colleagues literally are available 24/7 depending on where you want to go in the world. So don't hesitate to call me, and thanks again, Gunjan, and I'm here to answer whatever questions you have.
Are there any questions for Richard? Okay. I did want to comment on Select USA, the program that you brought up. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Select USA, which is the US government's incentive to bring foreign investment into the US. Do you know who leads that program? Okay. It's a name as Indian Americans we should recognize and remember, right? Vinay Thimapuli, right? Who also, if I understand correctly, when President Obama was a student at Occidental College, was either his roommate or his good buddy, and was appointed ambassador to Belize, I think, right?
That's how it works.
Yes, yes, exactly. Okay.
Make sure you omit that from the broadcast.
Hey, I can say anything, right? Yeah, yeah. I'm the consultant. I can get away with it. So I'm glad you mentioned agriculture as a primary opportunity in India. I think California is the breadbasket of the United States, the most fertile land in the world, and there are so many opportunities for companies. When we talk about almonds in India, most of the almonds you buy in India were grown in California. Okay? When you talk about pistachios, historically they came from Iran, right? But today, the world's largest grower of pistachios is a California company. They happen to be my client, and they are shipping hundreds of container loads of California-grown pistachios to India. Okay, you look at Washington apples, you look at many fruits, almonds, walnuts, you name it, raisins. They're going from California all the way to India. So there's tremendous additional opportunity as the Indian wallet grows. I want to be sure that we address the questions that came up early on. I didn't want to ignore them. So some of our speakers took them on. Somebody asked about the wealth tax. Is that gentleman still here, or no? I think he's left. The 10% growth. Did you get your answer to your question? Or? Okay. There was another question from there about presentations in Calcutta. The wealth tax, yes. So again, I'll give you my opinion. Okay. There are a lot of people making a lot of money in India. Most of them want to hide that money from the government because of the very aggressive attitude of the government as well as of hundreds of inspectors who want to come in and swarm in on the wealthy. So by removing the wealth tax, and it wasn't a very productive tax. It only raised about $250 million a year, right? By removing that wealth tax, there's a little bit of a less of an incentive for people to want to hide their wealth. Now, they're making up for it, and Mr. Jaitley was very clear in his budget speech, by raising the incremental tax on super wealthy, the large income earners. So they've raised the income tax but lowered the wealth tax. Rather than taxing assets, they're taxing income a little bit more at the high end. So they'll actually make more money as a result. But it's something that most wealthy people are actually happy about because people were just finding ways to avoid paying that tax. Okay, so it was making honest people dishonest, basically. That's my viewpoint. I don't know, the panelists may have some. Sunny, you want to add something?
I think that when you hear about the wealth tax, the first thing that comes to your mind is that, oh my God, all these rich people have all this money and they're not paying the tax. But if you look at detail as to what wealth tax is, if you're a company, then the assets of the companies are also taxed, different than what we would like. And there are advantages to not taxing the equipment that you have, things that are productive, and then can we move to the next level.
Okay. Any other unanswered questions? We want to be sure that we've taken care of. Yes, sir.
Besides this product and services like IT field, like you were saying, all the goods, where can we get a list like pistachios, raw fish, other stuff, what we can export and invest in it?
So your question is, what are the possible goods that could be exported from America to India?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll give you the short answer, and this is, in all seriousness, anything and everything. Okay, today, I'll tell you an extreme example, because we get calls from companies wanting to sell products, and we evaluate it very quickly to see whether it makes any sense or not. So I got a call from this guy who said he wanted to sell hot sauce to India, And I thought to myself, what is this Coles to Newcastle? What are you going to do selling American hot sauce to India? Until he pointed out to me that he was already selling $1 million a year. He wanted our help to take that $1 million a year to $5 million a year. There is a market for people in India who, instead of buying local mircha, will buy American mircha, which may eventually have come from India anyway, right? But now that it has been through some US processing, it becomes attractive. So another company that wanted to sell coconut water to India. An American company, actually this one was a Caribbean company, but their Canadian subsidiary came to us wanting to sell American coconut water into India. And there's a market for that. There are some people who will buy it. Okay? So there are very, very few things, I think, that would not sell. There are companies who have come to us who want to do like outdoor barbecue equipment.
Well, that, you would have to create a demand for something like that because that concept does not exist in India. So it could be done, but you'd have to invest a lot of money, before you would create that demand. Okay. Most Indians now live in high rises, so if you have products for yards, for the backyard lawnmower, well, that's going to be a tough sell. But they're very, very few. I mentioned these things to you only because they are so few and far between. Otherwise, virtually anything and everything that can be produced and used in the US has a demand of some kind in India. The key is, how do you connect to the right customers? Okay? And that's where I think you need some kind of third-party help to evaluate it. The US Commercial Service is great at helping small and medium-sized businesses. People like my company are great at helping larger companies to provide that service. And there's lots of free resources on the internet that you can find to be able to do that. Does that start to answer your question, sir? If you have a specific product category in mind, please tell me and I'll try and address that.
Well, I just wanted to know first, I'm an investor. I was looking for some products.
Okay. Do any of the panelists want to add to that?
I didn't mention this, but India's digital consumer market is growing huge. It's just exploding. 39 million at the end of this year, 2014. An estimated from Forrester, which is a reputable retail forecasting company, 128 million consumers online by 2018. And India's online retail market, that could be a little less, off a little bit, is estimated to reach 6 billion in 2015. That's PricewaterhouseCoopers. But I mean, it has grown 34% since 2009. So that's the new frontier. We're trying to get a handle on that. You probably have a better aspect. You probably have an interesting perspective. But I think another trend we have to look at is this consumer market versus retail versus online, and how do we get there versus logistics. This is a triad, and I didn't want to show you this title, but the title of my presentation was Deciphering the India Market Conundrum. So maybe this is it, this growing online presence versus a consumer market growing versus a logistical challenge, and at the basis of that is also all the legal aspects too. So,
okay,
I have a question for you.
Yeah, last question. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Used to be US Department promoting the country, they inviting, let's say people of India. They offer particular product. They specify what products are going. They also specify pretty much what is the future. They used to do it. I don't know if you do any more.
Yeah, we do.
It's a big need. A big need for Southern California.
We do. As long as we vet that you're, a U.S. entity, I'm happy to provide you the country commercial guide, the latest one that was published for FY15, which is in the fall of 2014, and give you all the compiled information from our commercial perspective on what the best markets are. For Southern India,
I want to share my experience. I was looking opening consulting office, and I was told in India, it's a good idea to go to American Embassy and commercial guy, because they will have pretty much connected, check out the guy who's willing to do business, like matchmaking.
Yes.
That makes much easier for the Indian guy to go run around the country and don't get anything. It's not that easy what you tell it. And Mr. Bagla, I totally agree. There are a lot of consulting office should be needed.
Right.
From California, Harrisburg, Bombay, or Delhi, we can do both sides of business put together.
Yes.
But that's not applied yet. It's keeping very closed door kind of knowledge.
It is, and I think between WIPRO and Sunny Service and a needs service, you get into areas of PII, personal information.
Yes.
And we have commercial intelligence. It's not quite like the CIA, but it's good commercial intel.
Right.
And that's why you still need the personal relationship, and you and I can talk offline.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Well, on that note, I want to thank our very fine panelists, Sunny, Kalra, Nitin, Amit, Richard. Okay.
Thank you, Gunjan. Thank you all the panelists. Thank you all of you. With this, we conclude the conference session.